Hello. It's time for another book chat. So Patrick and I are sitting here safely distanced apart and going to enthuse here for 10 or 15 minutes before we talk to Matthew Kirk, which will be another interview about some books that we like. So Patrick, I made you start last time, but let me leaf through here. I'm going to talk a moment about one of our favorite and best-selling authors, Martin Walker. I don't know if he will be able to join us on June 1st as scheduled. None of us know how it will go. But I really love this series. It started with Bruno, Chief of Police. It is set in the Périgord or Dordogne region in the middle of France. There's loads of food. In fact, there's even a cookbook, but alas, still in German, so not helpful to us. And also a TV series in German, not helpful to us. But this one, The Last Templar, a body is found at the foot of a cliff near the idyllic French town of Saint-Denis, and Chief of Police Bruno Courage suspects a connection to the Great Rune, a long-ago Knights Templar's stronghold. Bruno, who started out as sort of a simple village policeman, has progressed as this series goes to a much broader remit. It's full of dogs, horses, fabulous food, good times, and a lot of history. And if you've not read this series, I can't recommend it highly enough. And I would start with Bruno, Chief of Police, and work your way towards the Templar's Last Secret.
All right. Well, I have a stack of books here, most of which I have not read yet, but a few, so these will be books that I'm looking forward to for the most part. But this one, this book called Telephone by Percival Everett, I did just read. And Everett, I don't know what to say about him. He's one of my, I would have to say he's in my top 10 favorite writers currently at work today. He is a very unusual and interesting writer, and every book is completely different. And I don't know, this particular book it has a strange premise. It's about I'll just give you the brief blurb here. It says, Zach Wells is a perpetually dissatisfied expert in a very specific area, the geological history of a cave 44 meters above the Colorado River in the Grand Canyon. After a field trip to the desert yields nothing more than a colleague with a tenure problem and a student with an unwelcome crush on him, Wells returns home to find his world crumbling. His daughter, once a skilled chess player, is losing her memory and has developed strange eye problems. So how's that for a setup? I must confess, it's a little bit on the downbeat side, but Everett is the kind of writer who I just keep thinking about it, and there are some writers like that. He reminds me of James Salas in that respect, where he doesn't kind of hold your hand, as a reader. There's a little bit of work involved, and I really love his books. So he's very under the radar, and Grey Wolf, a publisher who I really admire. His last book, I must say, which was called So Much Blue, was just a masterpiece, and it didn't get any attention. So I always like to kind of give a shout out to these sort of writers. So that's what I got.
Well, as you pointed out in our last book chat, you are captured by voice, as am
Absolutely.
I. And so really, no matter how zany the plot premise, that's really not the point of reading the book for you. The point is to spend time listening to this voice and with the characters. Right?
Yeah, right. And he always does something different with each book.
Well, you have to admire that.
Yep.
I'm going to recommend a book that has been a bestseller, and I think now might be the perfect time to read it. It's called Dreyer's English by Benjamin Dreyer, an utterly correct guide to clarity and style. I think since we are communicating more and more, not face-to-face, but in this manner or by the written word, it couldn't be a better time to practice up your prose style. Mr. Dreyer himself was, if I remember this right, for a whole career. He was vice president, executive editor, and copy chief at Random House and began his career as a freelance proofreader. And so if you're questioning, I found that English is degrading all around us as we speak. For example, the verb is actually sink, sank, sunk, and yet sank has sunk because I never can find it anymore. He sunk into a chair. Totally wrong. Nobody understands may and might. Nobody understands less and fewer. Nobody, I mean, it's amazing to me. So I still care about using correct English. And I'd like to think that some of you might take some time and practice it up for yourselves.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me, I haven't read that book, but I love William Zinsser, who is another just wonderful writer. And also everybody should have Strunk and White, is it The Elements of Style?
Yes.
In their collection. I mean, it's a short little book, but I go back to it all the time. And then, of course, don't follow its rules. I alluded to this book the other day, this new book by Brian Panowich called Hard Cash Valley. And I just started it, and I'm really captivated by it already. Just, wonderful voice. This one's set, I believe this one's set in Georgia. Yeah.
Is he one of these country noir kind of guys
He
that
is.
you like?
He is. And I was thinking about that, and I don't know. I mean, I see how they group these writers together, but in some ways, I think it does them a disservice. I mean, David Joy, Brian Panowich, the one I mentioned the other day, Michael Ferris Smith.
Wiley Cash.
They're all Wiley Cash. Yeah, they're all very different, and they have very different styles, and what they're doing is different. But I see why they group them together. I mean, they're both writing kind of real muscular crime stories set in rural settings. So.
Set in places that you wouldn't naturally expect them to be, because for a long time crime fiction, so much of it was an urban setting
Right.
or an English village. So really, if you think about it, rural America is not that different than an English village.
That's true.
And there's an astonishing amount of bad stuff happening out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you're planning on setting up a possible virtue event with Brian?
I don't know. I haven't talked to him yet. I'm sure. Hopefully he'd be up for it. I might drop him a line and see if. I heard back from William Boyle, and he's definitely interested.
Good.
So we might do a series of short little chats, which would be a lot of fun.
It would be a lot of fun. Our calendar through the middle of April is very full, but then we have sort of several weeks, I think, where we could easily intersperse short or even longer events to keep you all interested. And I think that at this time when we're all so worried, it's good to have things to be hopeful about as well. I'm going to recommend a book that was originally published under the title Crossing the Line. It won the Ned Kelly, which is the Edgar Allan Poe Award of Australia, in 2018 for Best Novel. I am extremely fond of Sulari Gentle, the author, who has written the Roland Sinclair mystery set in the 1930s, but this is contemporary. It's really metafiction in lots of ways. We have two characters, Madeleine de Leon, who's an author, and Edward McGinty, who's is he a character she wrote? Is he an author in his own right? It's an absolutely fascinating book where you're never entirely sure what's going on, and it has a nice surprise ending. I think it's wonderful. I also think Australian crime fiction is fascinating to read, and there's more and more of it coming. So this would be an excellent book for you to read to kind of get your feet wet if you haven't read Jane Harper or, I'm going blank here, some other Australian authors that I
Gary
read.
Disher.
Yeah, I was thinking Candace Fox, that's who I was trying to think of. And there's a new book out by Sarah Foster I'll talk about next time, which I just finished. I thought it was terrific, so I do recommend that you look for some Australian writers if you're trying to find something different.
We actually didn't plan this. It's kind of serendipitous. One of my favorite writers at work is this guy named Dion Mayer. I always wanted to call him Dion Meyer, but it's Dion Mayer.
Is it actually Mayer?
It's Mayer. Yeah, I thought it was Meyer.
How often is it that there are names or words, particularly names, that we never hear pronounced, and so we give them our own pronunciation
Right.
and discover we were totally off base?
Yep.
It's like Joe Nesbo, who's really Joe Nesbo, but if you don't speak Norwegian, how would you know that?
Well, I asked him, I said, how do you pronounce your name? And he goes, for you, Joe Nesbo. And he just, but Dion Mayer, I was kind of turned on to his books, 15 years ago? I don't even remember. But for a while, Michael Connolly, who I'll talk about next, was bringing authors out on the road with him. Remember that?
I do, and Dion, in fact, came here from South Africa
That's
via
right.
however he got here. So we have done one actual live event with him.
2. We had him here.
Oh, we did too?
Yeah, we did one with him here as well. at this store, and then one in our short-lived downtown location.
Right.
But Dion Meyer, he's one of the few authors that I know of. I'm sure there are a bunch of them in South Africa that are writing, in their native Afrikaans, but Meyer writes in Afrikaans, and they're just wonderful books. What can I say? They're police novels, but he reminds me a little bit of Michael Connelly in a way. They're just very complicated, and the classic sort of tortured soul, alcoholic cop that we all love and relate to. But they're mainly set in and around Cape Town, and so you learn an awful lot about the social history of Cape Town in South Africa, and what's going on there. Just can't recommend him highly enough, and I wish he had more of a following here.
I think there are a number of South African writers who are really extraordinary, and definitely they give you a broad picture of a landscape that we are not so familiar with. It's easy to think about just the African bush. Actually, when I was in the African bush, I remember turning to my husband and said, "It looks just like San Diego." I mean, the bush literally is. I was envisioning thick forest, and all this other stuff, and it's really not. It's kind of scrub down there over in Kruger and down out with. You can drive over a lot of the bush when you're looking for animals. So I was quite surprised. If I paid more attention to Dion, it might have.
Have you been to Cape Town?
Yes.
Yeah, no, it looks absolutely beautiful.
It is beautiful, but if I had an analog city, it would be San Diego. In all kinds of respects. Part of the architecture, the coastline, the surrounding landscape. San Diego is where California runs down to the sea, and Cape Town is where South Africa runs down to the meeting of the Indian and the Atlantic Oceans. I mean, I've gone all the way down and walked out to the Cape where you can see the two oceans come together. It's quite dramatic. So I'm going for a classic here. I'm really proud of the fact that Poison Pen Press, which has been publishing British Library crime classics, has started the Library of Congress Crime Classics series, edited again by Leslie Klinger, who is the editor of the Haunted Library, and I'll speak about one of their new releases next time, and done with the Library of Congress Publishing Office. This one is by Anna Catherine Green, credited as the mother of the detective novel, and That Affair Next Door is anyway, by Les's standards, possibly her most memorable work. Miss Amelia Butterworth is the sleuth who prides herself on being an observer of human nature. It got a starred review recently, and I put that into the new April book news, which has just gone up online, and I have not read it yet, so I'm really looking forward to it. There will be a release of these Library of Congress crime classics every other month, and we have lined up C.W. Grafton, father of Sue Grafton, who wrote 3 mysteries, and his first novel, The Rat Began to Gnaw the Rope, I think is the second one in line after this one. So very exciting.
And didn't you just do the Beetle? Isn't that another one?
Yeah, I did talk about the Beetle. No, it's Phantom of the Opera. That's the first of the Haunted Library crime classics. The Beetle is the new one.
Right.
Which I should really get the publisher to talk about the Beetle, because it's a very strange book, but he liked it. So, one more for you?
I'll do 2 quick ones.
Okay.
All right. This one, I meant to do this last time. This is Walter Mosley's it's really a novella called Trouble Is What I Do, and it brings back the character Leonid McGill, who I love, just a real crotchety, classic New York detective. But it also kind of, if you've read his earlier book, R.L.'s Dream, which is about an old bluesman, very much kind of a reference to Robert Johnson and that whole story. There's a 90-year-old bluesman that plays a role in this book, and it's, what can I say? He's just such a great storyteller. I love everything he does. And quickly, I think I got this before you did. I'm really excited.
Not only before me, but you may have our only copy, so I'm stealing it when you're done.
Yeah. Michael Connelly's forthcoming book comes out on, May 26th?
It publishes on May 26th, and we're hoping to do a virtual event with Mike on Monday, May 25th, but there are a lot of details to be worked out before we can be formal about announcing it.
And it's notably, it brings back the character from the poet Jack McAvoy, who he hasn't written about in a long time.
No,
Scarecrow? Is that the last
I
one?
think so, yeah.
So that's very exciting.
He'll have 2 books out next year because he's also bringing back The Lawyer in the fall.
Yep.
Right, we've only got a couple of minutes left before we talk to Matthew, so I'm going to do a quick shout out. Jeffrey Siger, one of my favorite writers, one of my own writers. I edit his books. We can't go to Mykonos or the Greek Isles this spring, but you can go there with Jeffrey, and this book was published last year called The Mykonos Mob, but it now has a new title called Island of Secrets, which I think is an excellent title for it. It's a complicated police investigation. It's also a Me Too novel. There's just so many things about it that I recommend. And if you're missing travel, this entire series with Inspector Kaldos of the Greek police, is a terrific book to pick up. Terrific series, rather, to pick up. And finally, a quick shout out here to Mindy Mejia, whose new book, Strike Me Down, is coming out any moment. And it's a really fascinating book. It's got a forensic accountant at the heart of it, and you don't read that many books with forensic accountants as sleuths. I'm crazy about the ones by a Canadian author, and he writes the Ava Lee series. I'm going blank. Tell me his name. Ian Hamilton. Sorry, old age is catching up with me. Ian Hamilton's Ava Lee series, I think, is fabulous and also has a forensic accountant in it. But anyway, this is set in Minneapolis, and she's a whistleblower, and after she blew the whistle, the president of the company that went down as a consequence of it committed suicide. So she has a whole question of whether it was the right or the wrong thing to do, and then she gets involved in yet another potential disaster. Since we're all thinking about money and economics and how to survive at the moment, this book may be more timely than we actually expected it to be. But it's a crisp voice, it's a compelling voice, and very knowledgeable. And so, congratulations to Mindy for writing such a good book, and I highly recommend it. So, Patrick, this was fun.
Yeah.
We'll get together again in a few days next week and do another little book chat. Thank you for joining us. And you have to go turn off the camera, right? Right.